The seven seals of Revelation. The sixth seal in Revelation, chapter 6, verse 12 to 17. Let us first read passage on sixth seal. Revelation 6:12. And I beheld when he had opened the sixth seal, and, lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood. And the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as the fig tree casteth her untimely figs, when she is shaken of mighty wind. And the heaven departed as a scroll, when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And the kings of the earth, and the great man, and the rich man, and the chief captains, and the mighty man, and every bondman, and every free man, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? There are many things happening in the sixth seal. We have a big earthquake, there are changes in the sun and moon, there is also some extraordinary celestial phenomenon, followed by some geotectonic deformation. These events occur in all fronts, in the land, sky, the ocean, and you cannot say the sixth seal opened unless you observe all these phenomena in series. And some might speculate that the sixth seal must happen almost toward the end of human history because these events describe extremely uncommon, exceptional phenomena, but they have already happened. And we read about all kinds of people, including the kings of the earth, responding to the event, saying, For the great day of God's wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? And the very fact that the people have responded in this manner testifies that the great day of his wrath has not come yet. It is written there because John wrote down exactly what he saw and heard, but it does not signify that the sixth seal will open at the great day of God's wrath. But sure, these events forewarn us how frightening and how terrific that great day will be. Not even the most daring person on earth will be able to stand on that day. Anyway, in sum, I believe these events must have occurred in sequence from verse 12 to 14, and I believe people would have responded like in verse 16 and 17, in response to each event in verse 12, 13, and 14. Then what was the great earthquake in the sixth seal? If the fourth seal ended with the Black Death in the 14th century, the events in the sixth seal would have happened later than the 14th century. And when you research for the biggest earthquakes that are on record, you find only one record before 20th century. The 1755, the Great Lisbon earthquake, occurred in the Kingdom of the Portugal on Saturday, November 1st, 1755, the holiday of All Saints' Day. The earthquake almost totally destroyed Lisbon and adjoining area, destroyed all the large building structures and 12,000 houses. Seismologists today estimate the magnitude to be about 8.5 to 9.0. Tsunami waves resulted and the subsequent fire raged for 6 days. Death toll is estimated between 10,000 and 100,000 people in Lisbon alone. On the side note, economic historian Alvaro Pereira estimated the Lisbon's population to be approximately 200,000 at the time. The 1755 Lisbon earthquake is speculated to be the biggest earthquake before 1900, and the shock waves are felt in the area covering 4 times the size of Europe. Here's a 1755 copper engraving showing Lisbon in flames and a tsunami overwhelming the ships in the harbor. I don't think the word tsunami even existed at the time, but the historical evidences do present the existence of such phenomena like in this engraving. Nowadays, I assume everyone knows about tsunami because it is more common and happens more frequently around the globe. And someone had the calculated travel times for the tsunami waves of 1755 Lisbon earthquake available on Wikipedia. You can see how the waves travel across the Atlantic Ocean and reach the coastlines of the other continents. Now, if the Great Lisbon earthquake is the great earthquake in the sixth seal, then we need to search if the sun ever became black and moon as blood. So if you search for the dark day because the sun became black, then the search would lead you to the New England's dark day that occurred on May 19, 1780. The unusual darkening of the day sky was said to be observed over the New England states and the parts of Canada. According to Professor Samuel Williams of Harvard College, the darkness was seen at least as far north as Portland, Maine, and extended southward to New Jersey. And on page 519 of the Analytical Review, or History of Literature, Domestic and Foreign, and on Enlarged Plan, we see an account of very uncommon darkness in the states of New England, May 19, 1780, which writes, This extraordinary darkness came on between hours of 10 and 11 a.m. and continued till the middle of the next night. And when the night came in, the observers saw the moon colored red. Thus, the historic accounts made available on Wikipedia match exactly with the sixth seal of Revelation. And according to Harvard College professor Samuel Williams' account, the darkening of the day sky would have been observed in the color vision of the New England states of Maine to New Jersey. The next event in the sixth seal that we must look for is the stars of heaven falling onto the earth, and the heaven departing as scroll when it's rolled together. In the article titled The Falling of the Stars by Peter Millman, published on The Telescope, it states that the more than 1 billion shooting stars appeared over the United States and Canada alone. When did this event take place? It was November 13th, 1833, which fits perfectly in sequence with other events of the seals we discussed so far. Here, we also have the article titled Observations on the Meteors of November 13th, 1833, written by Dennison Olmsted, professor of mathematics and natural philosophy in Yale College. In the article, the Professor Olmsted discusses the estimate of the number of meteors, where his colleagues thought the estimate supposed by the writer in the Boston Sentinel was too low, where the stars have fallen at the rate of 34,640 an hour, making for 3 hours 103,920. And at this rate, from 12 till 7 o'clock, the aggregate number of meteors would amount to 207,840, inconsiderate of some factors, an estimate which probably does not exceed, though it may fall very far short of the whole number which were visible at Boston. So no one knows the exact number because it was estimated based on human observation, but certainly a lot of stars fell. Professor Olmsted collected observation and witness statements on the meteors of November 13, 1833 from the highlighted states. So what caused so many meteors to fall? It was known as the Leonids, the meteors on November 13, 1833. Leonids gets its name from the constellation Leo, where a prolific meteor shower appears to radiate from that point in the sky. And a Leonid meteor shower is not a one-time deal, because its parent body is a comet Tempel-Tudel with an orbital period of 33 years. So there are many Leonids in history, but the falling stars in year 1833 was most magnificent, uncommonly event that remained a historical event. And there was Mr. Alexander Twining, a civil engineer who wrote a letter to Professor Olmsted. The civil engineer observed the meteor shower phenomena at West Point and stated, "There was a point a few degrees south and east of zenith, which was evidently the directrix of all the apparent motions." I guess a civil engineer would know what directrix is, the technical term in mathematics to describe the curve, surface, and parabola, and he uses it to describe the observed astrological phenomena here. Every luminous body, without exception of those associated in the phenomenon, obeyed the regimen in relation to that point, which was such that every line and track of motion, if continued backward, would have passed, as nearly as the eye could discern, through that specific point. Can you picture what he is describing? An evident directrix of all motions mean that when observed from the Earth, you would be able to draw a line from that point in the sky, and it would seem as if all the stars are radiating out of that small circle in the sky. But if you backtrack the star's trajectory, then they would all come together at that specific point. This is what the civil engineer is explaining to Professor Olmsted. He provides a very detailed explanation so that anyone who had not witnessed the event can fully understand the event to fine details. And I think this drawing accurately portrays the directrix explained by the civil engineer, and I further suspect that this is what Bible prophesied about in Revelation 6:14, and the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together. And furthermore, we find the parallel expression in Isaiah 34:4, "And all the host of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled together as a scroll, and all their host shall fall down, as the leaf fallen off from the vine, and as the falling fig from the fig tree." So it mentions both the heavens being rolled together as a scroll, and the falling figs from the fig tree. And both of these, fig tree casting her untimely figs, and the heaven rolled together as a scroll, are found in the sixth seal. So some might view these two verses as separate events. I also thought so before, but now I interpret these verses to describe the same event. And don't you think this woodcut print published in Mechanics magazine strikingly resembled a fig tree casting off her untimely figs? Thus, we conclude that the heaven departing as a scroll and a fig tree casting her untimely figs shaken by a mighty wind in Revelation 6:13 and 14 are the same event of Leonids in 1833. Now that we have identified all the events of the sixth seal except for the last one, we might ask, what event moved the mountain and island out of their places? It was Sumatra megathrust earthquake on November 25, 1833. This occurred in the same year as the Leonids, but less than 2 weeks later, on November 25th. In order to better convey the significance of the Sumatra megathrust earthquake, I want to first cover some basics on the world's most seismic regions. Number 1 region is called the Ring of Fire in the basin of Pacific Ocean, also known as the Circum-Pacific Seismic Belt. There are 454 volcanoes in the Ring of Fire, and it is home to 75% of the world's active and dormant volcanoes. Famous earthquake zones like Chile, California, Japan, Philippines, New Zealand are all part of the Circum-Pacific Belt. This is why about 90% of the world's earthquakes and 81% of the world's largest earthquakes occur along the Ring of Fire. The world's next most seismic region is the Alpine Belt, which extends from Java to Sumatra through Himalayas and Mediterranean and out into Atlantic. The world's 5 to 6% of earthquakes occur here, but 17% of the world's largest earthquakes are accounted for in this belt. So when earthquake occurs, they are usually serious ones. Notably, the Alpine Belt is adjacent to the Pacific Ring of Fire, and the Sumatra situates where the red arrow is, and is under the influence of both the Alpine Belt and the Ring of Fire. And as we know, the earthquakes and the volcanic eruptions are a direct result of the movement and collision of the tectonic plates. But when you look up the information on Sumatra earthquake, you'll soon discover that the great or giant megathrust earthquakes have been recorded first in 1797, followed by 1833, 1861, 2004, 2005, and 2007. Then the question arises, if this event is prophesied in Revelation, why is this event not the first in series? Because usually the seals tend to mark the first of its kind and serves the reference point for many other events following thereafter. There are many islands that are affected by the series of Sumatran megathrust earthquakes. Andaman Islands, Nicobar Islands, Semulu Islands, Nias Islands, Batu Islands, Enggano Island, Sunda Strait, and Mentawai Islands are all impacted by the earthquakes in 1797 until 2007. But our main focus will be on the Mentawai Islands, which were most heavily affected by the megathrust earthquakes in 1797 and 1833, with its epicenters located around the region marked in red ellipse below the equator line. The Mentawai Islands situate right at the Mentawai fault line. To the west, the subduction of the Indian and Australian plates occur at 67 mm per year, and to the east, the Southeast Asian plate is sliding against the Sumatran subduction zone at the Great Sumatran Fault. Zooming in a little, we have a Mentawai Islands at a closer view. The Siberut, Sipora, North Pagai, South Pagai are largest of the Mentawai Islands. These are the regions that provide important evidences for the coseismic emergence that accompanied the earthquakes in 1797 and 1833. Since 1833 was the time before seismometer, other paleoseismic and paleogeodetic methods must be utilized in order to scientifically characterize the Sumatra megathrust earthquakes of 1797 and 1833. And coral microatolls provide an exceptional opportunity to understand the tectonic strain accumulation and relief. For this reason, some research scientists used coral microatolls as paleoseismic and paleogeodetic instruments to estimate the displacement of vertical deformation, the amount of coseismic slip on the subduction interface, and the geographic extent of rupture to constrain the magnitude of the earthquakes in 1797 and 1833. What does this mean? It means that the coral microatolls may act as a paleoseismometer and a paleogeodetic instrument, documenting relative sea level changes as small as few centimeters caused by vertical tectonic displacements over times not covered by instrumental recordings. And through proper modeling of these information, one can find out how great was the earthquake. How's this possible? It works like tree rings. The light, lower density band grows during the rainy season, September to March. The dark, higher density band forms during the dry season, April to August. And when analyzed together with mass spectrometric analysis and radiometric dating of the microatolls with a mix of purified fractions of uranium and thorium isotopes, it can render pretty accurate readings into the pre-instrumental past. Here, you can see radially cut cross-section of the coral slab. The concentric annual growth bands reflect lateral and vertical growth in those years. Such thing as the highest level of survival, or HLS, exists in the microatoll morphologies because the upward growth of coral heads is limited by aerial exposure during the lowest tide levels or exposure caused by tectonic uplift above the lowest low tides. And during the time of Sumatran megathrust earthquake in 1833, you can observe the highest number of coral death. This suggests that the vertical uplift due to the upward tectonic displacement from the earthquake was very severe in 1833. Using the coral HLS measurements, we can compare the tectonic displacements that took place in 1797 and 1833. The pattern of emergence from the 10 sites revealed that the Pagay Islands tilted northeastward toward the mainland. But uplift in 1797 was not as great as in 1833. While the recorded uplift measured from 0 to 0.8 meter in 1797, the uplift during the 1833 earthquake ranged from 1 to 3 meters. Researchers who attempted to reproduce the pattern of surface deformation by constructing elastic dislocation models of the purely dipped slip found a dip of 15-degree tilt in these islands. To summarize two Sumatra megathrust earthquakes, the uplift amount in 1797, which are the permanent displacement of geodetic vertical deformation, were a factor of 2 to 3 times smaller compared to the uplift amount or magnitude of seismic emergence in 1833. Also, the simple modeling of the coral data suggests that the 1797 slip averaged about 6 meters, which is about 1/2 to 1/3 the magnitude of slip along the 1833 rupture. Taken together with these coral data as the paleoseismic and paleogeodetic measurements, if we apply the full rupture extension of 550 kilometers spanning the entire Mentawai Islands, then the magnitude of 1833 earthquake would be 9.2, which is appreciably greater than that of 1797 rupture. And we can answer, did every mountain and island move out of or move from their places? Yes, they did. They moved vertically as well as horizontally, with slip size as great as 18 meters. Why is the 1833 Sumatra megathrust earthquake so important? Danny Hillman, Nata Widjaja, and others discuss in the Journal of Geophysical Research published in 2006 that slip in the 1797 model averaged about 6 meters. Hence, if 1797 type earthquakes were periodic and characteristic, they would recur about every 130 years. Likewise, the average slips about 15 and 10 meters in the 1833 models would correspond to return period of about 330 years and 220 years. The amount of slip that occurred beneath the islands in 1833 is far greater than could have accumulated between 1797 and 1833. If the slip averaging 10 plus meter had accumulated in just 37 years, the rate of trench perpendicular convergence would have been about 270 millimeters per year, which is many times greater than the known rate. And the known rate of the trench perpendicular component of convergence across the Sumatran plate boundary is about 45 millimeters per year. On the side note, the average modern rate of submergence and emergence shown in a post-1833 HLS history is about 6 millimeters per year, and indicated by the records of the inward dip of the outer brim of the microatolls, the average rate of the submergence, about 3 to 4 millimeters per year, dominated the period between the two events in 1797 and 1833. And the graph of the HLS history shows that the submergence rate averaged about 6 millimeters per year during the 7 decades prior to 1833. In sum, earthquakes occur in order to relieve the strain accumulated through years of tectonic movements, and Nata Widjaja and others are saying that the earthquake of magnitude 9.2 normally can happen after 330 years of dormant earthquake cycle. But as in the case of Sumatra megathrust earthquakes, an earthquake of greater magnitude occurred only 37 years after 1797, puzzling the field of seismology for the first time by suggesting that the earthquakes do not always relieve all the accumulated strains during the rupture. The fact that the 1797 earthquake compared to 1833 was smaller in magnitude seemed at first as if the 1797 rupture caused more strain than it relieved. To explain away the contradictory observations, the research scientists conclude that both earthquakes in 1797 and 1833 relieved the interseismic strains accumulated along the reach of the megathrust. And Natawijaja and others write, both of these observations imply that the 1797 and 1833 ruptures comprise a couplet that relieved strains that had accumulated in prior centuries. In other words, because the first rupture in 1797 could not relieve all the strains, the second rupture in 1833 followed afterwards, comprising a couplet. Hence, the slip in 1797 did not relieve all strains that had occurred in the previous interseismic period, and slip in 1833 relieved more than just those strains that had accumulated in the years since 1797. Natawijaja and others further write about at least two other examples of great earthquake couplets, without noticing its significance related to the Revelation's prophetic implications. One example is the great 1812 and 1857 ruptures of the Mojave section of San Andreas Fault, which were preceded by about 300 years of dormancy. Slip during both events was about 6 meters. The 6 meter of slip that occurred in 1812 would account for about half the strain accumulated about 35 millimeters per year in the prior 3 centuries. Taken together, however, these two slips plausibly account for all the strains that had accumulated in the preceding 3 centuries. The other example is the recent ruptures in the dextral strike slip Denali Fault at the crossing of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. Slip during the great 7.9 magnitude earthquake of 2002 was about 5 meters. At the 10 millimeters per year average slip rate of the fault at this location, an average recurrence interval for such ruptures would be about 500 years. Nonetheless, a rupture large enough to severely disturb trees along the fault occurred just 90 years earlier, in 1912. It is highly unlikely that the strains necessary to result in a 5-meter right lateral slip could have accumulated in 90 years between 1912 and 2002. Thus, what can he conclude? In all examples of great earthquakes known to man, among all examples of great earthquakes couplets selected from history, the Sumatra megathrust earthquakes of 1797 and 1833 marks the very first couplet, thus serving as the reference point for any future events resembling earthquake couplets. This is the first precedence. On a tangent, here's a news from NASA reporting that the Chilean quake shifted Earth's axis. Magnitude 8.8 earthquake in Chile on February 27, 2010 is speculated to have shortened the length of the Earth day by 1.26 microseconds. If Chilean earthquake of magnitude 8.8 can shift the Earth's axis, I'm confident that the Sumatra megathrust earthquake on November 25, 1833 of magnitude 8.8 to 9.2 has also shifted the Earth's axis of rotation, and as a result, it is most likely that every mountain and island are also shifted in space. Thus, this concludes the interpretation of the sixth seal. From Revelation 6:12 to 14, we have identified a series of events from 1755 until 1833, which are the Great Lisbon Earthquake, New England's Dark Day, Leonids or meteors, followed by the Sumatra megathrust earthquake. In these series of events, what particularly draws our attention is the fact that the location of events have spread worldwide. Revelation seems to make note of the Americas and include it as an essential part of the end-time prophecies for the first time. Also, for the first time, we have an event officially happening below the equator, which might be hinting to us that the events by the sixth in the septet series have gone and will go global.